Hey everyone, welcome back for another devlog. I've been working really hard and I got a lot to show off since the last devlog, so I think you guys are going to like this one. I'd say my main focus recently has been getting Sovereign to have this sense of gameplay and actual fun rather than, just an open, empty world that you walk around in that has a combat system. So that being said, we're going to kick this off with talking about the new quest system. So this I'm really proud of. I went and learned how to make custom asset types and graphs within Unreal to really push the potential of the quest system. So because of how dynamic quests really are, I didn't think I could really use blueprints to kind of decide every single quest in the game. And I thought about maybe defining all the data inside a data asset, but that would get really confusing from a design perspective. Also, being that I'm a solo developer, one of my main goals with the quest system was to have fully procedural quests as well as being able to script them. The scripted quests are for anything that needs to have a story, but procedural quests will help add a lot of replayable content into the game. This includes anything like going to take out a bounty or clear out a cave or any kind of quest like that, where I can just kind of specify these areas that these quests can kind of show up at, and then they'll generate by themselves. The first quest I got into the game is actually a randomized bounty quest. It'll choose between these 4 locations and then randomly generate a character for you to go take out. Quests like these are actually generated by a quest board, which is just an actor I can toss into the world and then specify what kind of quests it can generate over time. This is only the first way I have implemented to hand out quests to the player. Later, I'd love to add more ways to do so, such as like NPCs could ask you to complete quests, or maybe even just dynamic quests that happen as you go throughout the world. Like a carriage starts getting, robbed by a bunch of bandits, and that starts like a quest to go like stop the bandits and everything. Or maybe you could hear like a scream as you walk past a cave, and that could initiate a quest that says like go investigate inside the cave or something like that. The quest system is also built in a completely non-linear way that allows for me to create these quests that allow you to complete them in more than like one way. So going back to like the carriage driver that's getting robbed by a bunch of bandits scenario, maybe another way that the quest could be completed is you help the bandits, or maybe you kill the bandits and then rob the carriage driver yourself or something like that. It just allows for the quest to have like these branching kind of ways it could be completed. This is really cool because hopefully it gives the player a big sense of like freedom with what they can do in the world, and also adds just a lot of replayability knowing that they could play the same quest again but maybe have a different outcome this time. Lastly, during one of my live streams, a few viewers had the idea of players being able to create quests for all the AI and everything, and maybe the AI could try to complete them. I absolutely loved this idea. I thought it'd be really cool if the player could go up to like a quest board and put up a quest to like, I don't know, bring them 100 wood or something like that, and then you could see the AI in the world go out and, try to chop some wood. Like they would have accepted or reserved the quest or whatever, and then try to complete it and bring that to you. And I think that would add this huge feeling of the world just being alive around you, and this just, massive feeling of like immersion basically. Alright, next I'd like to talk about the relation or reputation system in the game. This is gonna seem kind of complex, but it's actually really simple. So anybody can have a relation or reputation towards somebody. It's basically this value of -100 to 100 on like how much they like or know this person. Usually a negative number means that they're more along the lines of like they don't like you at all, but it doesn't always mean that they're just going to be hostile. Every person can have their own like hostility trigger is what I call it. Right now the default is like -90. So if your reputation towards somebody is like below -90, then they will become hostile towards you. And then everybody has their default relations stat, which is just the value they assign to somebody when they first meet them. For most NPCs, this value will usually be 0, but we can assign it almost anything. So for bandits, it would be like -100. And so when a bandit first sees you and he assigns you the -100 value and then checks against his hostility trigger and realize that you're below it, and so they'll just attack outright. And the reason this is really cool is because instead of like hard coding every single bandit to just attack on sight, instead they have this relations towards you, and maybe there's like a quest or something and you found a way to raise that relations you have with these bandits, and now next time you see them they're not just going to be hostile right as they see you. And this leads into the next part. Every NPC can have a community that they exist in, which is also these exact same stats, but shared between a bunch of people. And then every community can have a faction that it exists in, which is, the same thing. It's a bunch of default relations towards people and what their default hostility trigger would be and how this faction kind of reacts to a certain person. So every NPC would have a faction and community influence, which is just how much their normal relations towards somebody can affect the community's relations towards somebody, and then also like the faction's relation towards them. So for example, maybe completing a quest for a farmer will have like some influence towards the city that he exists in, and probably no influence in the faction, but maybe completing a quest for the mayor or king or whatever of a town would have a lot more influence towards the community and also a bunch of influence towards the faction. But this also means it can be affected negatively. Like if you rob a shopkeeper, then obviously his relations towards you are going to be pretty low, or maybe even like below his hostile trigger. And then that, based on his, community influence, that will also affect how the rest of the community reacts to you. So you're going to be kind of down with the rest of the community, maybe not enough to be hostile, unless you, I don't know, maybe really robbed a lot of stuff. Then the whole town could be hostile towards you the second you enter it. The difference between a faction and a community is that a community would be something like a town or maybe a bandit camp. Everyone in the camp would be part of their own community. Whereas a faction is more something like the Stormcloaks and Imperials from Skyrim, where like there's a bunch of towns that are all in this one faction of like the Stormcloaks. And that's basically the reputation system in the game. So like I said, it sounds complex, but it honestly is really simple. It's just 3 layers of these variables of just relations with people, and then default relations and hostility triggers. Next, I refactored loot tables, because before how they kind of worked was every item could have like a rarity to it, which was just a % chance it would show up. And then I would make these loot tables of just like items and their rarities. And let's say we had like a chest that generated an item, and you open the chest and it just, randomly generates a bunch of items based on the % chance of them spawning. This was perfect in theory, but there was no way to change or weight an item's rarity based on anything else, such as maybe the player's level. As the player gets at a really high level, maybe more rare items can be found easier. Or maybe when there's more players, instead of being a solo, maybe you're playing with 3 of your other friends, and now we want to generate more of the loot so that it can be shared equally. That's basically what this refactor did, was allow me to plug into the item's rarity values and kind of add like these layers to them that could like help change and weight them. Also with this, I made it so loot tables can also have tables of like other loot tables. This means I could make one loot table of like all the weapons in the game and their rarities, and then maybe all the consumables in the game and their rarities. And then we have a chest where I want it to spawn from one loot table that is, a loot table of the consumables loot table and the weapons loot table. This basically adds a lot of reusability with all the loot tables in the game, because I can just make these generic loot tables and then just say like this chest can spawn between like a bunch of these. So initially I would assign all of the tables their own rarity, and then based on that rarity, it would, choose that table and then go through the table and then choose all of its items. But this actually proved to have an issue where it would skew the item's rarity based on how many items were in the list. So let's say I had a loot table with 1 item in it with a 25% chance of spawning, and then I had another loot table with 3 items in it, all with a 25% chance of spawning. There's 4 items in total, but because there's 2 lists, technically there's a 50% chance of each list getting chosen, and then it would choose between those items. So the list with 1 item in it doesn't actually have a 25% chance of spawning, because the list has a 50% chance of getting chosen, so then the item technically would have a 50% chance of being chosen. So in the end, I made a way for the item list to generate their own rarity based on the items inside of them. That way the list with 1 item in it has a 25% chance of being chosen, while the list with 3 items has a 75% chance of being chosen. And this is all calculated based on the items inside the list and their rarities, not just the amount of items in a list. Next, I wanted to start spicing up the game feedback, or I guess visual effects of the game. So the first part of this was I created this impact effects system, I guess you would call it, where I made a child of the physical materials that you can assign to any material in the game, and then kind of assigned them a bunch of data on what happens when they get impacted with. So now every physical material has a Niagara particle effect that it'll play, which also scales the effect based on the intensity of each like impact. And then they can also have a sound effect that will play. And then there's also a map that I have that can play specific, sounds and particle effects based on what kind of physical material ended up impacting with them. So metal impacting metal would have a different particle effect and sound effect than, say, like stepping on metal. So once I wrote the system, the next thing was to go through and start just making a bunch of different, physical materials. One for wood and metal and water and grass and rock and just everything you can think of. And then the most fun part, creating the particle effects for it. I really found that I just absolutely enjoy working with Niagara and just making these effects. And also making them scalable so that when they are impacted with, let's say, a footstep, it would change based on if you were sprinting or walking or maybe like even crouch. And then we want to play the same particle effect whether it was hit by something even more impactful, like you shot it with an arrow or hit it with a hammer or something like that. So as you can see here, all I have to do is turn up and down this intensity value, and you can see the impact gets, more impactful or less impactful, and it can even turn off certain parts of the particles based on the actual intensity value. I ended up absolutely loving this system because once it was done, it just started working like everywhere. I just, assign a physical material to like wood, and then all wood in the game would now have these impact effects no matter what hit them, and they would scale, so I could just start shooting, houses with arrows or walking on the porch, and like it would just add so much to the feel of the game and the immersion. The next pretty big system to make it, back into the game was Dismemberment. I know I talked about this in like Devlog 1 or 2, but honestly, it's not been in the game for probably about a year now, as it broke when we started doing the character mesh merging stuff, as well as like multiplayer in general was really broken with it. But this new implementation of it is like 1 billion times better than what I had previously, where like previously you could cut off like hands and I think feet and the head because they were different like modular meshes. But now any limb at all can be cut off. Like if it's a bone on the character's skeleton, it can be cut off. I initially came up with the idea on how to do this when I was looking through how to do like the runtime UV mapping stuff that we do for characters to give them, one draw call and everything. When I was looking through it and finding all like the vertex data, I realized you could read from the weight painted data of each vertice. So the idea was I could get every single vertex that's weighted to a bone and every single, child bone of that to get the entire limb. And then I would have like this vertex mask of an entire limb, and I could just, use an opacity mask to hide out that limb on the like parent character, and then invert that and then hide the, the body from the actual limb. And so then we get two separate body parts that's fully procedural. I spent about a month exploring this idea and building the dismemberment system around the weight painted vertex data. But about a month in, I started learning control rig in Unreal for some other systems within the game that I'll get to later. And that's when I found out that control rig can dynamically scale bones at runtime based on variables. This was something that I previously thought was impossible because in the normal animation graph, you can't expose the variable for the bone that you want to modify. So it was an idea that I just never really explored until finding out about control rig. And this ended up being the implementation I ended up going with for the dismemberment system. Because it turns out if you scale a bone down to 0, it just disappears. And if you scale a bone earlier in the skeleton's tree, you can still unscale the bone later on, which just ends up giving you a single limb. Because the system now just uses control rig with, scaling bones by their input name and stuff, it was fully procedural. So any character at all could use this, whether it was like a merged character at runtime or, maybe a dragon in the game, you could just start cutting it in pieces, or, something even worse like rabbits or something, which, kind of brought on a pretty big question. Should we allow anything to be dismembered? It's a discussion I had for a while with Twitch chat and everything. Obviously the answer is no, we don't allow everything to be dismembered. It's kind of messed up to go up to like a rabbit and start, cutting off its legs and stuff. That's like really messed up. Just because we have the tech for it doesn't mean it needs to exist. So where I think I'm actually drawing the line for the game is any humanoid character, or I guess monster, anything that's not actually something that exists in the real world, like bunnies and bears and deer and stuff like that. And even then, there's a very specific limit. Fighting a dragon, it is kind of cool to have like a finishing move where you cut its head off, and now maybe you have like a trophy of like a dragon head or something. But going up and fighting it and starting cutting off like each wing and leg and stuff is also really gruesome and messed up, and I don't want it in the game. So with my game, I guess if you don't want it to happen, there will be a toggle in the settings to like turn this kind of stuff off, because I know it kind of also doesn't really fit the art style at all, being this like stylized art style, and then there's just like blood and gore. But I think it makes combat just feel way better and more satisfying to like fight people and everything. And just because I'm not doing a realistic art style, that shouldn't hold me back from being able to do some of these things. So that's, I guess, why it's still in the game. I absolutely love stylized art styles. They give you so much freedom with whatever you're making just as an artist. But I also, you know, don't want to make a kid's game, right? Like, I want to make a game I would enjoy. Alright, there's actually a lot more stuff that I've got done since the last devlog, but this one's getting a bit long, so we're going to end it here and I'll save it for the next one. So yeah, thank you anybody who's stuck around this long in the devlog. I know this was a longer one than usual, but you know, like I said, there was just a lot to show off. And especially thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Of course, you guys are just awesome. I say it every single time in these devlogs. It's really the reason I'm able to just do this as often as I do. And if anyone is thinking about helping support the game, Patreon is the best way to do so. It helps me a lot and allows me to, you know, build this game of my dreams and get it out to you guys. I'd also like to thank everybody over on Twitch. All the subs over there really help too and allow me to do all of this. And if you're sick of waiting months for the next devlog to come out, make sure you stop by Twitch. I'm live literally every day but like the weekends, and we're always working and getting a bunch of stuff done. So yeah, thank you guys so much for stopping by on this one. I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next devlog. Bye.